Well, hello everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian out on the prowl, and I'm actually walking right across the street from Lone Fir Cemetery, which a lot of cases I've discussed in this series, a lot of the victims are probably, and family, are probably buried at this cemetery. In fact, I know some of them are. But anyway, today marks the beginning. There's no real organizational pattern to it, but today, give or take, I'm considering the beginning of season 2 of Historic Murders of Portland. Primarily, I'm dumping new videos from the series constantly because I've shot so many of them. But the bulk of the ones that have been showing to this point were shot between April and July of 2019. Today, it's like 2 weeks from Christmas, so it's been several months since I've done anything in the series, so it kind of feels like a new beginning, and this is all going to be a succession of new cases that I just recently found, like, seriously within the last week, so it's kind of a rebirth of the series. So, I'm calling it Season 2, Episode 1, and I want to put a disclaimer down as I'm already only a couple blocks from the site of this first story. I want to tell you, and I say this whenever I do a case that involves children. You know, I just want to put a disclaimer out there, that this is a very, any murder case is troubling, but this is a particularly troubling one because it does involve a child. And I know, some people, that's a very, very sensitive, it's sensitive to all of us, but some people are more sensitive than others. So I'm telling you right now, if you are at all sensitive to, I hate to say it this way because it should apply to everybody, but if you're really troubled more than the average person in terms of something horrible happening to a child, this is probably not the video for you to watch. So there's that disclaimer. And with that said, we're going back to July 16th, 1912. I'm in southeast Portland, heading towards the vicinity of Stark, southeast Stark and 28th, on this new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Alright, so I'm at 28th, and Stark is the crossing street behind me. Now, there's a house directly over my shoulder here, up the bluff a little bit there. That house was built in 1906, so it's the same house where this case took place, because the case is again from 1912. So I'm just imagining the case I'm about to unveil to you, because obviously I already know the details, and I think, right in that house right there, up there is where it happened. Now, this is the story of the Walsh family, namely Nettie and her husband, Robert. And I found a much better spot. There's literally, you can see the house between these two trees. Anyway, Nettie and Robert Walsh lived in this house, right over my shoulder, with the double garage, which I love. They lived together with their 4-year-old son, Vincent. And again, it's July 16th, it's the dead middle of summer, it's breakfast. All seems to be going as normally as it would any morning. A family wakes up, sits down for breakfast together. Nettie and Robert are discussing a trip to Seattle that they were planning on taking together. Maybe to rekindle their marriage, because their marriage had been a little rocky as of late, and I will get to that. And breakfast ends, all continues to seem well, and get out of my shot, truck. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Robert stands up, Nettie stands up. Nettie goes to leave the room, and once she gets into the main doorway into the kitchen, which these windows here, I'm wondering if maybe that's the dining area, because that would have been the area it would have happened. All of a sudden, Nettie turns and faces him and says something to the effect of, well, this is how it's going to end, or this is how I'm going to finish it. There was another newspaper article I read that said she turned and faced him and said, like, you old dirty dog, you're going to get it now, or something like that. There was a lot of variations on what Nettie Walsh said. And she turned and proceeded to open fire in the direction of her husband. And I don't know what her experience was firing a gun. I assume she wasn't that experienced. And she misfired, and immediately Robert charged her, and a scuffle ensues, and he's trying to get the gun away from her. And he's almost got her, pinned, and almost got the gun away, and all of a sudden the gun goes off. And it whizzes a bullet right past his head. I think he even had some slight marks, burn marks from the bullet, grazed across his face. And that was when he decided, nope, I'm out of here. And he stumbled back, turned, booked. He dived out of a window of the house and ran down. I'm assuming this is all the same. So, there's a stairwell over here that I assume he would have ran down to escape. He had to just flee for his life. And this unfortunately left a seemingly suddenly very unstable Nettie Walsh alone in the home with their son Vincent. Vincent had fled the scene. Obviously, you hear gunshots go off out of nowhere in your house. He ran into a bedroom and hid. He was crouched in a room. And Nettie Walsh just walked in to the room, looked down on her son, and shot him, I believe, in the back. And he freaked, took off running again. Somehow a 4-year-old getting shot in the back, he was able to continue to try to escape. And as he was, running through the house, she followed him from behind and shot him in the back of the head. And Vincent fell down to the ground dead there. And with her husband gone, her husband fled to a neighbor's house. And in the immediate moments after shooting her 4-year-old son, Nettie Walsh turned the gun on herself and shot herself. Fell down to the ground. And, beyond a 4-year-old child having to experience something that horrible at the hands of your own parents, police arrived on the scene at this house almost immediately after, because Robert ran across the street to a neighbor's house and called the police and said, my wife's trying to kill me. I don't think he thought that she was going to go after their son. Because, as I'll explain in a moment, the motivation behind this, and I'm sure there was a lot of mental instability, potentially a lot of mental illness in Nettie Walsh's character that didn't help things. But yeah, he called the police, and the police arrived, the newspaper says, within seconds after the shooting event at this house. And I'm going to walk off to more residential streets, less street traffic. But the most disturbing thing I read in reading on this case was officers charge into the house. There's a crazed woman on the loose with a gun, which I believe it was her husband's gun that she had grabbed. And he probably assumed she'd never, ever try to go get his gun for anything. Because, I don't know much about guns, but because of the time, it's 1912, because of, weaponry was just more primitive. And the gunshot, I think it was the wound in the back that their son Vincent had sustained, the powder, it actually sparked a fire, and the police said that when they arrived, there was smoke coming out of the windows. So they thought maybe the house was on fire, and what really was going on was Vincent's clothing had caught fire from the effect of being hit with the powder from the bullet that hit him. So when the police charged into the building, Vincent's lying there dead with 2 gunshot wounds, and his body was on fire. And they I think they grabbed a blanket or something like that and quickly put him out. But just... Hello. Squirrel just popped up out of nowhere, scared the crap out of me, as you were. But anyway, still just like definitely one of the most tragic stories I've read. And Nettie Walsh, despite trying to commit suicide in the end, did not actually die right away. Yeah, there were actually news articles that were saying like, oh, you know, she's not dead yet. We actually think she might recover. Her condition is stabilizing. And I don't think there was much validity to any of that, because one of the officers reported when they reported to the scene that, you know, I mean, she shot herself in the head. I think she missed her brain just barely, so people just kind of assumed she would come out of it. But one of the officers on the scene said, you know, in contravention to that, that she literally, like, her brains were dripping out of her head. Like, she was not going to, I mean, she survived for a while somehow, but she ultimately passed as well. So it was a successful murder-suicide wherein, you know, I don't know. You know, who knows what this woman was thinking. I don't know if she would have gone after her son if she had successfully shot her husband. The primary target of the whole thing managed to escape. And I know there was a woman named Martha Christensen who was a close friend of the family. I think Nettie had lived with her for a while, so they had a really close connection with one another. And she had no idea that anything had happened. But she showed up there that morning frantic. And she asked what happened, and she was told, and she was like, oh my God, I know. Now, I don't know if this is just the ravings of a random person. It's common now, it was extremely common back in the day for people to just disrespectfully try to interject themselves as something of significance in a crime that had happened. But this Martha Christensen, again, family of the friend, said the night before that she had a dream about like Vincent getting very sick or something bad happening to Vincent. And she woke up in a panic and quickly rushed to the house. And by the time she got there, her old friend Nettie had murdered her son Vincent. Now, again, I think there was a lot of mental instability going on with this woman. I mean, it's one thing to go after your husband for what you feel are just means, but then when it doesn't work out and you go after your child who's done absolutely nothing wrong, purely innocent of any wrongdoing in this case, and you don't just kill him, but you kill him so coldly. Like, she sought him out, and when she found him, opened fire seemingly without a second thought. And then when he tried running away after being shot, she gunned him down again. So I think there was a lot going on with this woman, but the perceived motivation for Nettie Walsh's heinous actions was, like a lot of other cases, infidelity on the part of her husband. She had, I guess you could say, gotten it on good authority that her husband was seeing another woman. And about a week before the shooting happened, her husband was traveling south from Portland towards Oregon City, which Oregon City's, I don't know, 10, 12 miles south of the Portland border. And she wanted him busted and arrested. Because you know what? Adultery, that was taken a lot more seriously back in the day. And she actually got an officer to go with her to try to follow him and catch him in the act. And what the officer didn't realize was she was carrying a gun at the time. And they tracked him and, you know, caught him red-handed with this other woman. Fortunately, there was an officer on the scene, and it seemed, at least according to Nettie Walsh, she didn't want to shoot her husband. She wanted to shoot the other woman, but the officer was able to disarm her. And there's this moment where it's reported in several newspaper articles that when the officer took the gun away, she felt like betrayed by the officer. She was like, no, give me, literally to the officer, and got in no trouble. In fact, I think her husband actually got arrested for getting caught. But Nettie Walsh literally started yelling at the officer, like, what are you doing? Give me my gun back so I can shoot her. Like, she was just so aghast that the officer wouldn't just let her do that. And yet she was able to go home. Now, also, in addition to that, because apparently, you know, Nettie Walsh claimed later on, right before the shooting, that they had reconciled. And, he was in jail for 30 seconds. And it seemed like things had been soothed over. Maybe he realized what he was doing was wrong. Maybe things were getting better. But in addition to that, Nettie Walsh claimed, and who knows if this is true because it's clear that she was out of her mind, she actually was a very wealthy woman. I think the product of a prior marriage to a guy that had a lot of cash to throw around. And she, I guess when they divorced, she got a large chunk of change. I don't know how much money Robert was making, but she, had her own money. And she contacted the police and said that, money that she had was disappearing. A good amount of money. I think it was over $1,000 or $1,500 or something, which back in 1912, that's a lot of money. And, she was claiming that her husband was, stealing it. So here she's got something else she wants her husband busted on. And she actually had, the police had actually established a warrant to go arrest him for this. And when that happened, the day before the shooting took place, this is very sinister. Nettie Walsh contacts the primary officer that she'd been in discussions with about this particular issue of her money disappearing, contacted him and said, hey, that whole arrest warrant thing, all that stuff, forget about it, don't do that. And then essentially she said, I'm gonna take care of the situation myself. And then, less than 24 hours later, she, in a way, did take care of it herself. I mean, not quite, because her intended target managed to escape with his life, but, he had to go on the rest of his life knowing that his son was murdered so horribly. And, and then eventually his wife passed from her injuries, and it's just definitely one of the most tragic cases. Just at a whole other level than a lot of these cases. A lot of these cases I discuss, are, people who got drunk, knocked each other off, partners in crime turning backs on each other and things like that. But, very seldomly is there really, truly pure innocence taken as a result of these murders. There's some, but this is up there. And, obviously there was no real trial or investigation afterwards. Everybody knew what happened, and there wasn't a suspect alive to go to trial. It was just the tragic story of a woman who snapped in the moment, or more than likely had been coming apart for a very long time. And all it took was a catalyst. Her husband's infidelity, her presumption that he was stealing money. We never really established fully if he was. Since the police did take out an arrest warrant on him, seems to make it look like he probably was. So maybe this Robert really wasn't, stealing money. He's probably stealing money and spending it on other women. So, he's not really that great of a guy. But, the price he had to pay for it was literally losing his whole family. So, it's a horrible tragedy all around. There's plenty of tragedy for everyone that was involved. And that is the story of Nettie Walsh, one of the most cold-blooded, crazy murder stories in the history of Portland. The kind of ones that you wish you didn't ever had to stumble onto, but they exist out there like the rest of them. So remember, guys, as always, again, thank you so much for watching. And just remember to like, share, subscribe if you so choose. Hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. And as always, guys, again, thank you for watching. And this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.